He lived far from towns and busy roads, in a small wooden cabin, surrounded by wide-open land. The rancher was a quiet man who had learned to enjoy silence. His days followed a simple routine. He woke before sunrise, fed his animals, checked fences, and worked the land until the sun dropped low. At night, he sat near the window with a lamp and a cup of warm coffee, listening to the wind move through the grass. He did not talk much, and there was no one nearby to talk to anyway. People in distant towns knew of him, but only by reputation. Some said he was unfriendly. Others said he was just tired of the world. The truth was simpler. Life had taken too much from him, and he chose distance instead of noise. Years earlier, he had lost his family to illness, and the pain never fully left him. Since then, he trusted his land more than people. The open sky asked nothing from him, and the earth did not judge. His ranch sat close to land claimed by the Apache people. He respected that boundary and never crossed it. He believed that if you left others alone, they would do the same for you. Still, there was always tension in the air, something unspoken. Travelers avoided the area, and traders passed quickly. The rancher did not think much about it. He had learned that fear grew when people talked too much. One evening, dark clouds gathered faster than expected. The wind grew strong, and the air felt heavy. The rancher finished his work early and headed back to his cabin. As he tied his horse near the shed, he noticed something unusual near the tree line. At first, he thought it was an animal resting. Then he saw movement that was slow and unsteady. He picked up his lantern and walked closer, careful with each step. As the light reached the ground, he saw a young woman lying in the grass. Her clothes were torn and covered with dust. She looked weak, and her breathing was shallow. For a moment, he froze. People did not simply appear on his land, especially not someone in such condition. He looked around, half expecting someone else to appear. The land was silent except for the rising wind. He knew immediately that she was Apache. Her dark hair was tied loosely, and her features were clear even in the dim light. His heart began to race. Helping her could bring trouble. Leaving her could mean something worse. He stood there longer than he realized, caught between fear and conscience. He had avoided danger his whole life. Yet he also knew what it meant to be left alone. When help was close but withheld, the memory of his past pressed on him, heavy and sharp. Slowly, he knelt beside her. She opened her eyes just enough to see him, and tried to move. But her strength failed. She did not speak. She only looked at him, fear and hope mixed in her eyes. That look decided everything. The rancher carefully lifted her, surprised by how light she felt. He carried her toward the cabin as the first drops of rain began to fall. Each step felt heavier than the last. Not because of her weight, but because of the choice he had made. Once inside, he laid her on his bed and wrapped her in a clean blanket. The cabin was small but warm. He lit the fire and placed water on the stove. He worked quietly, gently cleaning her wounds and giving her sips of water when she could swallow. He did not know what had happened to her, and he did not ask. He believed some stories should be told only when the teller was ready. Outside, the storm grew stronger. Rain beat against the roof, and thunder rolled across the land. The rancher sat near the bed, watching her breathe. Every sound made him alert. He wondered if someone would come looking for her, and if they would see him as a helper or a threat. As the night passed, her condition slowly improved. Her breathing became steadier, and the color returned to her face. At one point, she opened her eyes fully and looked around the cabin. Her gaze stopped on him, and for a brief moment, they simply watched each other. He nodded slightly, hoping to offer comfort without words. She whispered something in her language, a soft sound that carried emotion even if he did not understand it. He replied quietly, telling her she was safe, even though he was not fully sure that was true. When morning came, the storm had passed. Sunlight streamed through the window, lighting the small room. The woman slept peacefully now. The rancher stepped outside to check the land. He scanned the ground carefully and noticed faint tracks near the edge of his property. They were fresh. A feeling settled deep in his chest. He knew her presence would not remain a secret for long. Still, when he returned inside and saw her resting, he felt no regret. He prepared food and set it aside, ready for when she woke. As the day went on, she became more aware. She accepted the food and water with quiet gratitude. They spoke little. Using gestures and simple words, trust grew slowly, like a fragile bridge being built one careful step at a time. The rancher understood that this moment would change his life in ways he could not yet see. He did not know who she truly was, or why she had been running. All he knew was that she had come to him in need, and he had answered. Outside, the land remained wide and still, but something unseen had already begun to move toward his cabin. And as night approached once again, the rancher felt it clearly. The quiet life he had chosen was about to be tested, not by anger or force, but by the weight of an unexpected human connection that could not be ignored. The next few days passed slowly, measured by small moments instead of hours. The rancher stayed close to the cabin, keeping his routine quieter than usual. He did not ride out to distant fences or spend long hours away. Something inside him told him that leaving her alone, even for a short time, would not feel right. The young woman rested most of the time. Her body was healing, but strength did not return quickly. Each morning, he brought her water and simple food. He spoke in a calm voice, even though he was not sure she understood his words. Still, tone mattered. Kindness could be felt even when language failed. At first, she watched him carefully. Her eyes followed his movements, always alert. She did not trust easily, and he did not blame her. The world beyond the cabin walls was not gentle. He made sure his actions stayed slow and clear, never sudden. When he cleaned the floor or added wood to the fire, he did it with purpose, letting her see that there was no threat. Over time, her fear softened. She began to sit up on the bed, then stand near the window. She looked outside often, studying the land, as if searching for signs only she could read. When the wind moved through the grass, her shoulders tensed. When birds lifted suddenly into the air, her hand moved to her chest. The rancher noticed these things. He had lived close to nature long enough to understand alertness. Whatever she had escaped from was still close in her mind. One evening, he gently pointed to the chair near the fire and motioned for her to sit. She hesitated, then nodded. They sat across from each other, the firelight dancing between them. He tried simple words. He pointed to himself and said his name. Then he pointed to her, waiting. She paused, then spoke softly. Her name carried meaning he could not grasp, but he repeated it carefully, wanting to show respect. A small smile touched her face for the first time. From that moment, a fragile bridge formed. They shared small exchanges, food, water, gestures, and looks that said more than speech could. The rancher learned that silence did not always mean distance. Sometimes, it was simply space for understanding to grow. Yet outside the cabin, tension built quietly. One afternoon, while checking the ground near the tree line, he saw clearer tracks than before. Multiple sets this time. They circled the land but did not cross too close. Whoever made them was careful, watching, not rushing. That night, he locked the cabin door for the first time in years. The sound of the latch echoed louder than it should have. The woman noticed immediately. She asked something softly, her eyes filled with concern. He did not answer with words. He only nodded and placed more wood on the fire. Sleep did not come easily. Every sound felt sharper. The creak of wood, the wind against the walls, the distant call of night animals. He lay awake, thinking about the choice he had made. Helping her felt right, but right choices often carried heavy cost. The next morning, she surprised him. She stepped outside the cabin on her own, standing in the sunlight. She closed her eyes briefly, as if giving thanks. Then she knelt and touched the ground. It was a simple act, but it carried deep meaning. The land was not just soil to her. It was life. She began to speak more, using gestures to explain bits of her story. He understood pieces. She had been running. She had been hurt while trying to escape danger. There were others searching for her, but not all with the same purpose. Some wished to protect, others did not. The rancher listened without interrupting. His jaw tightened when he realized the weight of her situation. Whoever she was, she mattered deeply. That kind of importance brought attention, and attention brought risk. As days passed, he noticed signs of distant movement. Smoke far off on the horizon. A shadow where there should have been none. Always far enough to avoid contact. Close enough to be known. The woman sensed it too. Her eyes grew serious, her posture alert. One evening, she finally told him the truth, as best she could. She pointed toward the distant hills and spoke of her father, her people, and her place among them. Even without perfect understanding, the rancher realized what she was saying. She was not just anyone. She was deeply connected to leadership, to responsibility. The realization settled heavily on him. Sheltering her was no longer just an act of kindness. It was a decision that could change many lives, including his own. He felt a moment of doubt, sharp and uncomfortable. He had chosen a quiet life to avoid such things, but when he looked at her, standing there with calm strength despite her fear, his doubt faded. Some paths were chosen by circumstance, not desire. Turning away now would mean betraying the very values he lived by. That night, the woman handed him something small. A simple object, worn smooth by time. She pressed it into his palm and closed his fingers around it. Her eyes met his, serious and steady. It was not payment. It was trust. He nodded, accepting it with care. In that moment, an unspoken agreement formed between them. Whatever came next, they would face it with honesty and respect. Outside, the land remained quiet. But the silence was different now. It was waiting. The rancher stood near the window, watching the dark horizon. He did not know what the next day would bring, but he knew one thing clearly. This was no longer just his story. It was becoming something larger, shaped by courage, trust, and the understanding that sometimes the greatest risks begin with a simple act of shelter. The woman's strength returned little by little, like the slow rise of the sun after a long night. Each morning, she walked a bit farther outside the cabin, breathing deeply and studying the land. The rancher watched her quietly, noticing how her steps grew steadier and her shoulders less tense. Healing was not just happening in her body. Something inside her was also finding balance again. They spoke more now, though words were still limited. She used signs, expressions, and short phrases. He listened with patience. He had learned that understanding did not always need perfect language. Sometimes it needed attention and respect. One afternoon, while the rancher repaired a broken fence near the cabin, she approached him slowly. She held her hands together, as if gathering courage. When he looked up, she met his eyes and began to speak carefully. Her voice was calm, but there was weight behind it. She told him more about who she was. She explained that her father was a respected leader among her people. His decisions affected many lives. Because of that, her own life carried meaning beyond herself. She had not run away out of fear alone. She had left because she believed someone close had placed her in danger. Trust had been broken, and she needed time and distance to understand what was happening. The rancher felt the truth of her words, even when he did not fully grasp every detail. He could hear it in her tone and see it in her eyes. This was not a story made in panic. It was a careful telling, chosen with thought. As she spoke, he felt a shift inside himself. Until now, he had seen her mainly as someone in need. Now, he saw her as someone carrying responsibility, someone used to being watched and judged. The quiet strength he noticed before made sense. When she finished, she waited. He could see the question in her face. Would he still help her? Now that he knew the truth, the rancher took a deep breath. He did not speak right away. He looked across the land, at the wide sky, and the steady earth beneath his feet. He thought about the life he had built. Simple and isolated. He thought about how easily it could be disturbed. Then he looked back at her and nodded. He told her, in simple words, that she could stay until she was ready to leave. He said he did not fear who she was. He feared only doing the wrong thing. A small smile appeared on her face, one filled with relief rather than joy. From that day on, their bond changed. It grew stronger, built on honesty instead of uncertainty. She helped where she could, sweeping the cabin, preparing food in her own careful way, and tending to small tasks outside. The rancher welcomed the help, not because he needed it, but because it gave her purpose and dignity. They shared meals in comfortable silence. Sometimes, they spoke of the land, pointing out plants, animals, and signs in the soil. She taught him how to notice patterns he had missed, how the ground could speak if you listened closely. He showed her how he cared for the animals, explaining each step slowly. Outside the cabin, the signs of others remained. Tracks appeared and faded. Distant movement was felt more than seen. The watchers stayed respectful, never coming too close. It was as if an invisible line had been drawn around the ranch. The rancher understood that her people knew where she was. They were waiting, observing his actions. Each choice he made mattered now, not just to himself. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with soft colors, she grew quiet. She sat on the porch, holding the small object she had once given him, now returned to her hands. The rancher sensed something important was coming. She spoke slowly, choosing her words with care. She told him that soon, she would have to face her father and her people. Hiding forever was not an option. Questions needed answers. Truth needed to be spoken. She also told him that his kindness would not go unnoticed. Among her people, actions mattered more than promises. Shelter given freely carried great meaning. The rancher felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that this chapter would not last forever, and sadness that it would end it all. Her presence had filled the cabin with something he did not realize he had been missing. Not noise, but connection. That night, he could not sleep. He sat by the window, watching the stars. He wondered what would happen when her people came forward openly. Would they trust him? Would they see him as a threat, or as a man who simply did what felt right? Morning came quietly. The air felt different, charged with expectation. The woman woke early and dressed with care. She stood tall, her posture confident, as if preparing for a moment she had known would arrive. As the rancher stepped outside, he noticed something new. Near the edge of the land, small markers had been placed, stones arranged in careful patterns. They were not warnings. They were messages. He could not read them, but he understood their purpose. Communication had begun. The woman joined him, her expression calm. She explained that her people were signaling respect. They were letting him know they would approach openly, not in secrecy. It was a way of honoring his choice to protect rather than turn away. The rancher nodded, feeling both humbled and nervous. He had lived most of his life unseen. Now, he was part of something larger than himself. As the day moved forward, he prepared the cabin, cleaning and organizing, not out of fear, but out of respect. He wanted those who came to see him as he truly was: simple, honest, and grounded. When the sun reached its highest point, distant figures appeared on the horizon. They moved slowly, without haste. The woman stood beside him, her face steady, her eyes focused. The rancher felt his heart beat faster, but he did not step back. Whatever happened next would be faced openly. He realized then that the greatest discovery he had made was not about danger or surprise. It was about himself. In choosing to help her, he had stepped out of isolation and into meaning. And as the figures drew closer, the quiet rancher understood that his life had already changed, not because of fear or force, but because of truth shared, trust earned, and a bond formed in the simplest of places, a small cabin under a wide, open sky. The figures on the horizon moved slowly, never rushing, never hiding. The rancher stood still, his feet planted firmly on the ground. He felt the weight of the moment settle over him like the quiet before a storm. Yet there was no anger in the air, only purpose. As the group came closer, he could see that they were carefully spaced, walking with calm confidence. No one raised a hand or made sudden moves. The woman beside him took a deep breath. Her face showed strength, but also emotion held tightly under control. This was not just a meeting. It was a return. They stopped a short distance from the cabin. An older man stepped forward. His hair was marked by time, and his presence was steady and commanding without needing words. The woman moved ahead, stopping halfway between the rancher and her people. She spoke clearly, her voice carrying across the open land. The rancher could not understand her words, but he understood the tone. It was honest. It was respectful. It carried truth. The older man listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded slowly. Then his eyes turned to the rancher. The look was not sharp or judging. It was careful, thoughtful. A look given by someone who measured people by actions, not rumors. The rancher felt his throat tighten. He stepped forward, keeping his hands visible, his posture open. He spoke simply, choosing words slowly. He said he had found her hurt. He said he offered shelter. He said he asked nothing in return. There was a pause. The wind moved through the grass, and the land seemed to hold its breath. Then the older man spoke. His voice was calm and deep. Though the rancher could not understand the language, he understood the meaning carried in the sound. It was not anger. It was acknowledgement. The woman translated as best she could. She said her father thanked him. She said he recognized the risk the rancher had taken. She said honor was owed where kindness was shown. A weight the rancher did not know he carried lifted from his chest. More people stepped forward now, placing objects on the ground between them. Small offerings, symbols of respect. Nothing was demanded. Nothing was taken by force. It was an exchange built on balance. As the meeting continued, the rancher noticed something that surprised him. The land around his cabin was marked with quiet care. Stones placed in patterns. Signs meant to guide, not warn. The people had not surrounded his home to threaten him. They had surrounded it to protect what mattered to them. The woman explained that after she disappeared, fear had spread among her people. Some believed harm had come to her. Others believed she had been taken. Searching parties were sent out, but with strict instruction. No damage, no fear spread, only observation. When they realized she was safe, and that the rancher had offered help without expecting reward, the decision was made to watch rather than interfere. Trust had to be earned from both sides. The rancher listened, feeling humbled. He had thought himself alone, unseen. Yet every step he had taken had been noticed. As the sun moved lower in the sky, the meeting grew quieter. Words were fewer now. Understanding had replaced explanation. The older man stepped closer to the rancher and placed a hand over his own heart, then gestured toward the cabin. It was a simple motion, but its meaning was clear. The rancher returned the gesture, unsure if it was correct, but certain it was sincere. The woman stood between both worlds, her role now clear. She was not someone to be hidden or feared. She was a bridge. As evening approached, a decision was spoken. The woman would return with her people, but not in haste. She would leave with dignity, not secrecy. Her story would be told fully, truth separated from fear. The rancher felt a quiet sadness rise within him, but also peace. This chapter was closing, not breaking. Before leaving, the older man spoke again. The woman translated softly. He said the rancher would always be welcome. His land would be respected. His name would be remembered. Not as someone who took, but as someone who gave when it mattered most. As the group prepared to depart, something unexpected happened. Two figures stayed behind briefly, walking the edges of the land. They placed additional markers, careful and deliberate. Protection, not control. The rancher realized then what he had discovered outside his cabin was not a threat, but a promise. His home, once isolated and forgotten, had become a place of trust. When the woman turned to leave, she stopped in front of him. She met his eyes, her expression full of gratitude and resolve. She spoke quietly, thanking him for seeing her not as a danger, but as a person. He nodded, unable to find words that felt large enough. She stepped away, joining her people as they moved across the land, their figures slowly blending into the wide horizon. The rancher stood there long after they were gone, the silence returning, but changed. That night, he sat by the fire, the cabin filled once again with quiet. But it was not the empty quiet he once knew. It was full of memory and meaning. He looked around his small home and understood something important. Shelter was not just walls and a roof. It was choice. It was courage. It was the willingness to stand firm when fear offered an easier path. Outside, the land rested under the stars, watched not by eyes of suspicion, but by respect. And for the first time in many years, the rancher slept deeply, knowing that what he had discovered outside his cabin was not unbelievable because it was frightening, but because it showed how powerful, simple human kindness could be when given freely. Without condition, morning arrived gently, as if the land itself wanted to move carefully after everything that had happened. The rancher stepped outside his cabin and breathed in the cool air. The wide land stretched before him, quiet and open, just as it always had been, yet it no longer felt the same. Something unseen had settled into the soil, something lasting. He walked the edges of his property, noticing the markers that had been placed with care. They were not signs of control or warning. They were reminders. Respect had been shown, and respect had been returned. The rancher touched one of the stones and felt a calm sense of assurance. His home was still his, but it was also understood now. Life slowly returned to routine. The animals needed care. The fences needed checking, and the land still demanded steady hands. But the rancher moved differently now. His steps felt lighter. His thoughts, once filled with silence alone, now carried memory and meaning. In the days that followed, travelers began to pass through the distant roads again. Word had spread, though not loudly. People spoke carefully. With respect, they spoke of a quiet rancher who had done the right thing when it mattered. No details were exaggerated. No stories were twisted. The truth was strong enough on its own. One afternoon, a small group approached his land openly. They stopped at a respectful distance. Among them was a familiar face. The woman stepped forward, standing tall, calm, and confident. She was no longer injured or uncertain. She carried herself with purpose. The rancher felt a smile form before he realized it. She greeted him warmly and explained that she had come with permission. Her father wished to check on him, not out of worry, but out of respect. She said her people remembered kindness clearly, and they believed in maintaining bonds built on trust. They sat outside the cabin and shared food. Conversation flowed more easily now. Words were clearer, understanding deeper. The rancher learned more about her life, her responsibilities, and her hopes for the future. She spoke of balance, of leading with patience rather than force. Before leaving, she handed him a small gift. It was simple, carefully made, and full of meaning. She told him it was not a debt, because kindness was never something to be repaid. It was a reminder that his choice had mattered. As time passed, the rancher noticed subtle changes around him. The land near his ranch felt safer, calmer. Conflicts that once seemed close now felt distant. People respected boundaries more carefully. Trust had created space for peace. He continued to live simply. He did not seek attention or praise. He did not speak often about what had happened, but when he worked the land or sat quietly in the evening, he felt a sense of belonging he had not known before. One night, as he watched the stars, he thought about the path his life had taken. He had once believed that staying alone would protect him from pain. But now, he understood something deeper. Isolation could keep danger away, but it could also keep meaning out. Helping one person had opened a door he did not know existed, not to noise or chaos, but to connection. Seasons changed, the land shifted colors. Life continued, steady and honest. From time to time, he would notice distant figures passing peacefully, always respectful, always calm. No fear followed them, only understanding. The rancher grew older, but not tired. His days remained full, not because they were busy, but because they felt complete. He had learned that courage did not always appear loud or bold. Sometimes it appeared as a quiet decision made in the dark, guided by conscience alone. Years later, when others spoke of him, they did not call him brave or heroic. They called him fair. They called him kind. And those words meant more to him than any title ever could. On his land, under the wide sky, the rancher lived out his days knowing one simple truth. When he opened his door to someone in need, he did not lose his peace. He found it. And that was the discovery that stayed with him forever.